Money buys comfort. Status buys access. But inside a courtroom, neither buys respect. When Nathan Carlisle, a billionaire hotel heir known for his ego as much as his empire, strutted into that courtroom, he thought he was untouchable. The designer suit, the entourage, the smug grin that said, "Rules are for everyone else." To him, this wasn't a legal proceeding. It was a performance, and the audience was there to admire him. But the woman seated behind the bench wasn't impressed. Her silver hair gleamed under the harsh courtroom lights, her expression sharp and unreadable. To her, power meant nothing if it wasn't tethered to integrity. The case? A former employee suing for wrongful termination and harassment, a small-town single mother who dared to speak against a man who owned everything but humility. Nathan smirked through her testimony, whispered jokes to his lawyer, and rolled his eyes at the evidence. To him, this was already won, until he opened his mouth one time too many, because when arrogance collides with accountability, only one side walks out intact. And when the judge leaned forward with that calm, piercing look, the kind that silences even the loudest rooms, Nathan realized too late that there are no VIP privileges in her court. By the time the gavel fell, his empire wasn't the only thing cracking. His illusion of control shattered right with it. The air outside the courthouse shimmered with late morning heat. Luxury cars lined the curb, their black paint glinting beneath the sun. A small crowd had gathered near the steps, reporters clutching microphones, photographers jockeying for a clear shot. They weren't there for justice. They were there for a show, and at the center of it all, Nathan Carlisle thrived. He emerged from the back of a sleek Bentley wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's annual rent. The sunglasses, the gold cufflinks, the faint smirk, it was all deliberate. He moved like the world bent around him, like gravity itself took orders. Behind him trailed his assistant, his attorney, and two bodyguards who looked like they could bench press a small car. Cameras flashed as he strode toward the courthouse doors, every step echoing arrogance. "Mr. Carlisle! Any comment on the case?" One reporter shouted. He didn't even glance their way. "Just another nuisance suit," he said, his voice calm and dripping with dismissal. "It'll be over before lunch," the crowd murmured, pens scratching furiously. That was Nathan's favorite part. The attention, the control. He'd been raised on both. His father, Charles Carlisle, had built a hotel empire from scratch, and Nathan had inherited the fortune, along with the ego that came with it. He was used to being the loudest voice in any room, but today, he was about to meet someone who didn't care how much his watch cost. The opponent inside. The courtroom sat Maria Lopez, the woman suing him. She wasn't dressed in power or wealth, just a simple navy blouse and a pair of neatly pressed slacks. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes betraying exhaustion more than anger. For her, this wasn't about money. It was about dignity. Maria had worked for Nathan's chain of hotels for 6 years as an assistant manager. She'd handled guests, long hours, endless pressure, until one night, she said, Nathan himself made her a target. A comment here, a touch there, subtle at first, then not so subtle. When she spoke up, she was quietly fired 2 weeks later. Everyone told her to let it go. "You can't fight people like him," her sister warned. "He has lawyers on retainer and politicians on speed dial." But Maria wasn't fighting for revenge. She was fighting because she wanted her son, 10-year-old Daniel, to grow up knowing that silence doesn't equal defeat. So, she filed the lawsuit. And now, here she was, sitting in a courtroom where her truth would have to stand against his power. The judge arrives. The room buzzed with whispers and soft footsteps until it silenced in an instant. The bailiff's voice cut through the air. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Evelyn Marks." The courtroom stood as the door behind the bench opened. In walked the experienced female judge, silver hair neatly pulled back, black robe flowing, her expression calm but commanding. Judge Marks didn't rush. She didn't need to. Authority followed her like a shadow. Nathan watched her take her seat. For a brief moment, something flickered in his expression, respect, maybe even caution. But then it vanished, replaced by the same smug grin. The judge adjusted her glasses, glanced at both parties, and spoke in that low, deliberate tone that carried weight in every syllable. "Mr. Carlisle, Ms. Lopez, this courtroom exists for truth, not theatrics. I expect civility from both sides. Is that understood?" Maria nodded immediately. Nathan leaned back in his chair and gave a small shrug. Of course, Your Honor. The judge's eyes lingered on him for a second longer than usual. It wasn't hostility. It was assessment, the way someone might look at a chessboard before making the first move. The opening move's Nathan's attorney, Richard Hall, was a man molded by wealth, slick voice, sharp suit, and a perpetual half-smile that never reached his eyes. Your Honor, he began, rising smoothly, this case is a tragic misuse of the court's time. My client, Mr. Carlyle, has been unfairly accused by a disgruntled former employee. We intend to show that these allegations are not only false, but malicious in nature. He turned slightly, his tone dripping with condescension. Ms. Lopez was terminated due to poor performance, documented and verified. This, he gestured broadly, is an attempt to profit from my client's success. Nathan nodded in agreement, his gaze shifting toward Maria with a look that said you shouldn't have dared. Maria's attorney, Laura Grant, stood next. She wasn't flashy, but there was a quiet fire in her eyes. Your Honor, she said, voice steady. This case isn't about profit. It's about power, and how easily it can be abused when someone thinks they're above consequence. Nathan scoffed audibly. Laura didn't miss a beat. We'll show evidence that Ms. Lopez was harassed, then terminated when she refused to stay silent. And we'll show that Mr. Carlyle used his position to intimidate her into submission. The judge raised an eyebrow. Thank you, counsel. Let's proceed with the evidence. The testimony. Maria took the stand. Her voice was soft at first, hesitant. She described the first inappropriate comment, a compliment that turned uncomfortable, and how it escalated from there. Each word carried a tremor of vulnerability, but also resolve. When Laura asked how she felt after being fired, Maria hesitated, then said, I felt invisible. Like all those years of hard work didn't matter. Like I was disposable. Across the room, Nathan chuckled under his breath. The judge's gaze snapped toward him. Is something funny, Mr. Carlyle? He smirked. Just finding it hard to take this performance seriously, Your Honor. Judge Marks's tone dropped a degree colder. You'll take it seriously in my courtroom or I'll hold you in contempt. Understood? The smirk vanished. Understood, he muttered, jaw tightening. For the first time, the crowd sensed a shift. The balance of power, so comfortably resting in Nathan's hands, had tilted. The evidence Laura introduced a series of text messages, emails and call records, pieces that on their own might have seemed minor. But together they painted a picture Nathan couldn't dismiss. Messages late at night. Comments that blurred professional lines. Promises of promotion if Maria played along. Richard objected at every turn, but the judge overruled most of them. When the final email appeared, one where Nathan had written, "Loyalty has its rewards. You scratch my back, I scratch yours." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Nathan shifted in his seat, visibly irritated now. His jaw clenched, eyes darting between the screen and the judge. Your Honor, Richard began. This is taken out of context. Judge Marks interrupted. Context doesn't erase intent, Mr. Hall. Continue. Nathan leaned toward his lawyer, whispering sharply, I told you to shut this down. The judge glanced up. Mr. Carlyle, you're welcome to represent yourself if you can't respect your counsel. The courtroom snickered softly. Nathan sat back, seething. The arrogance peaks by lunch break. Nathan was visibly irritated, his confidence chipping away under the weight of facts. Outside, reporters swarmed for sound bites. He obliged, of course. This is a witch hunt, he declared. I've created jobs for thousands of people, and this is how they repay me? One person's bitterness doesn't erase success. His PR team scrambled to manage the fallout, but it was too late. The clip hit the evening news before the trial even resumed. Back in the courtroom, Judge Marks' patience was wearing thin. She addressed both counsels before restarting proceedings. Let me remind everyone, especially Mr. Carlyle, that this courtroom isn't a stage for publicity. It's a venue for truth. And I will not tolerate grandstanding. Clear? Nathan's lips pressed into a line. Crystal, Your Honor. But his tone said otherwise. The slip, the next witness, a former HR director from Nathan's company, hesitated as she took the stand. Her testimony was cautious, until Laura asked one simple question. Did you ever feel pressured by upper management regarding complaints made against Mr. Carlyle? The woman froze. You could see the internal battle play out on her face. Finally, she said quietly, Yes. By whom? By Mr. Carlyle himself, the room gasped. Nathan's lawyer leapt to his feet. Objection. Speculation? Overruled, Judge Marks said sharply. Proceed, Laura pressed on. What kind of pressure? The witness swallowed hard. He said, if we valued our jobs, we'd make sure complaints against him didn't go anywhere. All eyes turned to Nathan. His composure cracked. Not fully, but enough for everyone to see the fissure. He muttered something under his breath. The judge heard it. Mr. Carlyle, would you care to repeat that? He met her gaze, smirking defiantly. Yeah, I said this is ridiculous. You think I'm scared of this? I could buy 10 courtrooms like this one. The air froze. Judge Marks leaned forward slowly. Mr. Carlyle, let me be clear, you can't buy justice, not here. And if you speak out of turn again, you'll find yourself behind bars for contempt. Am I understood? For a moment, even Nathan didn't have a comeback. Cracks in the crown as the day wound down. Nathan's lawyer tried to regain control, but the damage was done. His arrogance had become the prosecution's best evidence. The judge called for recess, her tone cool but pointed. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning. I suggest both parties use the time wisely, especially those who seem to confuse wealth with wisdom. Nathan glared at her, but she didn't flinch. As the bailiff called the session adjourned, Maria allowed herself the smallest exhale of relief. She wasn't naive, she knew they had a long way to go. But for the first time, she felt like the scales might be shifting in her favor. Outside, Nathan stormed past reporters without a word this time. The mask of control was cracking, and the world could see it. Behind closed doors. That night, Nathan's penthouse suite became a storm. Glass shattered. A vase hit the wall. His attorney tried to calm him down. She's turning the court against you, Nathan, Richard warned. You have to stay composed. She's humiliating me, Nathan shouted, pacing. That judge, she's got it out for me. Richard sighed. No, she's got it out for arrogance. There's a difference. Nathan turned, eyes dark. Then maybe it's time to remind her who she's dealing with. But Richard didn't reply. Because deep down, even he knew, power had limits, especially when it met someone who refused to be impressed by it. The next morning, the courthouse felt different. The energy was sharper, heavier, like everyone knew the performance was over and the reckoning had begun. Maria arrived early, clutching a small silver locket around her neck. Inside was a photo of her son, Daniel. It reminded her why she was there, not just to face Nathan Carlyle, but to prove that no one, no matter how rich or connected, was beyond accountability. Nathan, however, arrived late, again. He walked in 15 minutes past the scheduled start time, wearing a smirk that dared anyone to call him out. His phone was still in his hand, texting, laughing quietly to himself. Judge Evelyn Marks was already seated. She didn't say a word at first. She simply looked at him. That slow, deliberate gaze that could silence a room. Mr. Carlyle, she said finally, her tone controlled but cold. Do you believe your time is more valuable than this court's? Nathan slid into his chair. Your Honor, my driver, stop. Her voice sliced through his excuse like a blade. You will show respect for this court, or you will spend the rest of this trial watching it from a holding cell. Do I make myself clear? For the first time, Nathan didn't have a clever retort. Crystal, he muttered, jaw tightening. The employee files Maria's attorney, Laura Grant, opened the day with new evidence, a series of internal memos and HR reports that had mysteriously disappeared during discovery, but were recently recovered by a whistleblower inside the company. Laura walked to the center of the room, holding a thin folder. Your Honor, these documents show a pattern, not a one-time incident. Multiple employees filed complaints against Mr. Carlyle for inappropriate behavior. Every single one was dismissed within 48 hours. Judge Marks nodded slowly. Admissible. Continue. Laura held up one of the pages. This one is from 2 years ago. The complainant describes comments identical to those made toward Ms. Lopez. She was transferred to another property the following week. Her complaint file vanished. Nathan leaned toward his lawyer, whispering fiercely. How did she get those? Richard whispered back. You told me they didn't exist. Nathan's face hardened. Laura handed copies to the judge and defense counsel. The courtroom was dead silent except for the sound of pages turning. Nathan tried to sit still, but his foot tapped against the floor, a nervous tick betraying his composure. The judge looked up. Mr. Carlyle, do you wish to respond to these new allegations? Nathan forced a smile. Your Honor, I run a large company. Hundreds of employees. I can't possibly know every rumor that passes through HR. The judge tilted her head slightly. So your defense is ignorance? Nathan chuckled. A mistake. It's not ignorance, Your Honor. It's delegation. You know how competent people manage others, the courtroom murmured. The judge didn't blink. Mr. Carlisle, in this courtroom, competence means accountability. And arrogance, in case you're unclear, is not a legal strategy. The witness who knew too much. The next witness was unexpected. Eli Turner, a former corporate attorney who'd quietly resigned from Carlisle Holdings 6 months earlier. Eli looked nervous but resolute as he was sworn in. He spoke with the careful precision of someone who understood both the power and danger of his words. Laura began. Mr. Turner, did you have access to HR records during your time with Carlisle Holdings? Yes, Eli said. Part of my role involved reviewing internal complaints and advising senior leadership on potential legal exposure. And were any of those complaints related to Mr. Carlisle's personal behavior? Eli hesitated. Several were. Were those complaints handled according to company policy? He looked down. No, they were suppressed. Suppressed how? By directive from upper management. Whose directive? Eli exhaled. Mr. Carlisle's. The courtroom erupted in gasps. Nathan shot to his feet. That's a lie. Judge Marks slammed her gavel once. Sit down. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried absolute command. Nathan froze. Then slowly, he sat, the color draining from his face. The turning point Laura approached the witness stand again. Mr. Turner, did you ever discuss these decisions directly with Mr. Carlisle? Yes. He told me, quote, some people need to learn when to shut up or they'll lose their paychecks. Nathan's head snapped up. His lawyer whispered, do not react, but it was too late. Nathan leaned forward, sneering, that's not what I said. He's twisting my words. Judge Marks fixed her gaze on him. Mr. Carlisle, one more outburst and I'll have you escorted out. I'm not interested in theatrics. I'm interested in truth. Nathan slumped back, muttering something under his breath. What was that? The judge asked sharply. He looked up defiant. I said truth is subjective. The judge leaned forward. Not in my courtroom, Mr. Carlisle. Here, truth is evidence. And so far, the evidence isn't on your side. Nathan went silent. The crumbling defense. After a short recess, Richard Hall tried to salvage the defense. He called Maria's former co-worker, a man named Jason Reed, who claimed she'd been difficult to work with, but Laura dismantled his testimony with precision. Mr. Reed, didn't you receive a promotion 2 weeks after Ms. Lopez was terminated? Jason shifted uncomfortably. Yes. And that promotion came directly from Mr. Carlisle, correct? Jason hesitated. I suppose. So when you describe Ms. Lopez as difficult, are you speaking from experience or from gratitude? The silence that followed was answer enough. The judge glanced toward Nathan. Mr. Carlisle, I hope you're taking notes. Loyalty can be bought, but credibility cannot. Nathan's lips twitched in annoyance. For the first time, even the reporters watching from the gallery seemed to feel it, the unraveling of a man who had never once been told no. The slip that changed. Everything by the afternoon, the pressure was visible. Nathan's temper, usually hidden behind charm, began to leak through. During cross-examination, Laura asked a simple question. Mr. Carlisle, would you agree that power can sometimes blind people to the consequences of their actions? He smiled tightly. Only if they're weak, she nodded slowly. So you believe accountability is weakness? I believe, he said, leaning forward, that people who complain about others' success are just jealous. It's easier to cry victim than admit you failed. The room went quiet. Even his lawyer turned to him, eyes wide. Why would you say that? Judge Marks straightened slightly in her chair. So, just to be clear, you believe Ms. Lopez filed this suit out of jealousy? Obviously, Nathan said. She wanted a promotion. She didn't get it. So she's here trying to get a payday instead. The judge's voice was low, almost a whisper. Mr. Carlisle, you do realize you're under oath? He smirked. I do, Your Honor, but the truth doesn't need polishing. The judge leaned forward, eyes like cold steel. No, Mr. Carlisle, but arrogance does. The crack in his armor when the court adjourned for the day, Nathan was livid. Cameras followed him outside, microphones catching every frustrated breath. "She's biased," he snapped at one reporter. "You can see it. She's taking this woman's side because she wants to make a name for herself off mine." The clip aired within hours. The next morning, social media was flooded with comments. Some mocked him. Others called for boycotts of his company. His PR team scrambled to issue statements. Meanwhile, Maria sat quietly in her apartment, watching the same footage on her small television. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just whispered to herself, "Truth doesn't need a microphone." Her son Daniel peeked from his bedroom doorway. "Mom, are you winning?" She hesitated, then said softly, "We're being heard. That's what matters." Back in court by day 3, the courtroom had become a theater of tension. Every seat was filled. The press lined the back wall. Judge Marks began proceedings with a firm tone. "We will continue with cross-examination. But before we do, I remind all parties, this is not a spectacle. This is a pursuit of justice." Nathan's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. Laura resumed her questioning. "Mr. Carlisle, yesterday you stated that Ms. Lopez's allegations were motivated by jealousy. If that's true, how do you explain the multiple similar complaints filed by other employees, all women, all dismissed under your authority?" He hesitated. "Coincidence." Laura's eyebrow arched. "Coincidence? Or culture?" Nathan laughed under his breath. "You can call it whatever you want." "Successful men always have targets on their backs," the judge interjected quietly. "And sometimes, Mr. Carlisle, those targets are self-inflicted." A ripple of tension spread through the room. Nathan opened his mouth. But this time, his lawyer placed a hand on his arm. "Don't," he whispered. It was too late. Nathan stood up, unable to contain himself. "You're all the same, jealous of anyone who wins." The judge's gavel struck once. "Hard, Mr. Carlisle!" He froze. "This is your final warning. Sit down. One more outburst and I'll find you in contempt." For a second, no one breathed. Then slowly, Nathan sat. The weight of the judge's words hung heavy in the air. For the first time in his life, Nathan Carlisle was not in control. The judge's warning as court recessed. Judge Marks spoke one final time. "Mr. Carlisle," she said evenly, "I suggest you reflect before tomorrow. This court will not tolerate disrespect, not toward the process, not toward opposing counsel, and not toward me. If you continue down this path, your wealth won't save you. Justice will." She stood, robe catching the light like a shadow of finality. The bailiff's voice echoed, "All rise." The courtroom stood as she exited, leaving Nathan staring at the empty bench. For once, he looked uncertain, because for the first time, he'd met someone who couldn't be bought, and that was a currency he didn't know how to spend. The next day, the courtroom was packed wall to wall. Every seat filled, every camera poised, every whisper electrified with the sense that something was about to happen. The story had exploded overnight. Nathan Carlisle, billionaire, hotel heir, symbol of untouchable arrogance, was trending for all the wrong reasons. But inside the courthouse, none of that mattered. Not to Judge Evelyn Marks. When she entered, the crowd's murmurs fell into silence, replaced by the soft echo of her heels on the polished wood floor. She didn't need to speak to command order. Her presence did that for her. "Good morning," she said simply. "Let's finish what we started." Nathan was already seated, his usual swagger stripped to something colder. A simmering, resentful silence. His lawyer looked worn, his tie loosened, his patience thinned. Across the aisle, Maria Lopez sat quietly, her hands trembling just enough for her to notice. But her eyes were steady. Today wasn't about fear. It was about closure. "The cross-examination begins." Laura Grant rose from her seat, walking slowly toward the witness stand. "Mr. Carlisle," she began, "you've maintained that all complaints against you were unfounded, that each employee simply misunderstood your intentions. Correct?" Nathan leaned into the microphone. "Correct. So every single one of them, the late-night texts, the invitations to your private suite, the sudden job transfers, all just coincidences?" He smirked faintly. "People like to exaggerate, especially when they think it'll get them attention." Laura nodded. "So they're all liars?" "If the shoe fits," he said, voice dripping with disdain. The judge's eyebrow rose slightly. She didn't speak yet. She didn't have to. Laura picked up a sheet of paper. "Mr. Carlisle, I'd like to read an email you sent to your head of HR 2 years ago. You wrote, 'Stop forwarding me every little complaint. These women know what they're getting into.' Nathan stiffened. Laura looked up. Do you recall writing that? He hesitated. I might have said that, but it was sarcasm. Your sarcasm, Laura said, stepping closer, cost people their jobs. It silenced them. It protected you. He leaned back, crossing his arms. No one forced them to work for me. That was it. The sentence that cracked the courtroom's composure. Gasps filled the air. Maria's attorney didn't need to say a word. The damage was done. Judge Marks finally leaned forward. Mr. Carlisle, let me remind you, this is your testimony under oath. And arrogance won't help you here. Nathan rolled his eyes, muttering, so much for impartiality. The judge froze. Her gaze locked onto him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Excuse me? She said softly. He looked up, jaw tightening. I said you've been biased since day one. Let's not pretend otherwise. The room went silent, the kind of silence that feels like it could crack glass. Judge Marks spoke carefully, each word deliberate. Mr. Carlisle, that statement alone could land you in contempt. He gave a bitter laugh. Then do it. And that's when the world stopped moving. Contempt of Court Judge Marks didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Bailiff, she said quietly, escort Mr. Carlisle to holding for contempt. He may rejoin these proceedings when he remembers how to conduct himself with basic respect. The room gasped as the bailiff stepped forward. Nathan's lawyer jumped to his feet. Your Honor, please, my client misspoke. The judge didn't even look at him. Mr. Carlisle has spent this trial mistaking this courtroom for his boardroom. It's time he learns the difference. Nathan stood laughing incredulously. This is insane. You can't, but before he could finish, the bailiff's hand rested firmly on his shoulder. Sir, let's go. The cameras captured it all. The defiant heir being escorted from the courtroom like a schoolboy caught cheating. As the doors shut behind him, the judge exhaled slowly. We'll recess for 15 minutes. The return when Nathan returned later that afternoon, the swagger was gone. His hair was slightly mussed, his tie undone, his jaw locked tight. His eyes darted toward the cameras, but the defiance had faded. What replaced it wasn't humility, not yet, but the first crack of fear. Judge Marks didn't speak about his removal. She didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew the unspoken message. No one is above the rules. Let's continue, she said calmly. Mr. Carlisle, you may resume your seat. He sat down, avoiding eye contact with everyone, even his lawyer. The turning of the tide. Laura resumed gently, her tone measured. Mr. Carlisle, earlier you said you value competence. Would you say integrity is part of that? He nodded stiffly. Sure. So when multiple employees report misconduct and those complaints are buried, is that integrity? His silence was damning. Laura turned toward the judge. No further questions. She sat down, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time, she felt it. The tide had turned. Now it was the defense's turn. Richard Hall rose, his tone sharp but desperate. Your Honor, if I may, my client has been subjected to a trial by media. The court of public opinion has already decided against him. Judge Marks nodded slightly. That may be true, Mr. Hall, but I am not the court of public opinion. I am the law. The room fell still. Richard continued. Then, Your Honor, I move for dismissal on the grounds that these accusations lack direct evidence of intent. Denied, the judge said instantly. Intent has been demonstrated through testimony, pattern, and Mr. Carlisle's own words. The blow landed like a hammer. The verdict approaches. When Maria took the stand one last time, the courtroom's energy shifted. She wasn't angry anymore, just honest. She described how the stress of losing her job nearly cost her apartment. How she'd picked up late-night cleaning shifts just to keep her son fed. How, when people told her to drop it, she almost did, until she realized silence would make her complicit. I'm not here for money, she said softly. I'm here because people like him think they can do whatever they want. And if someone doesn't say something, they'll just keep doing it. The judge's gaze softened for a brief moment. Thank you, Ms. Lopez. You may step down. Then she turned toward Nathan. Mr. Carlisle, do you have any final statement before I deliver my judgment? Nathan looked up. The room waited. Cameras leaned forward. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His lawyer whispered, Say something, anything humble. Nathan exhaled slowly. I may have said things I shouldn't have, but this is overblown. I've built something great, and now I'm being punished for it. The judge's expression didn't change. Not punished, Mr. Carlyle, held accountable. The judgment, the courtroom was so quiet. You could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Judge Marks straightened in her chair, adjusting her glasses. This court has reviewed all testimony, documentation, and evidence presented. What I've seen over the past 3 days is a pattern of entitlement, deceit, and disregard for basic human dignity. Mr. Carlyle, your arrogance has blinded you, not just to the harm you've caused, but to the reality that your power ends where accountability begins. She paused, glancing toward Maria. Ms. Lopez, this court commends your courage. Standing up to power requires strength that cannot be measured in dollars or status. Then she turned back to Nathan. As for you, Mr. Carlyle, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff. You are hereby ordered to pay damages in the amount of $750,000 for wrongful termination, emotional distress, and punitive harm. In addition, this judgment will be forwarded to the appropriate authorities for review of potential workplace misconduct. The sound of the gavel striking wood echoed like thunder. Case closed. For a moment, Nathan didn't move. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. His lawyer whispered something, but he didn't hear it. His gaze was locked on the judge, the one person in his life who'd never flinched before him. Maria, across the room, covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. She wasn't celebrating. She was releasing years of fear, frustration, injustice all unraveling in one breath. Judge Marks rose, gathering her files, her voice calm but cutting one last time. Mr. Carlyle, consider this a reminder. Privilege might buy you comfort, but it can't buy you character. And with that, she walked out. The collapse outside the courthouse, the press swarmed like a storm. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed in bursts. Nathan pushed past them, saying nothing. The smirk was gone. His silence was louder than anything he could have said. Inside, Maria exited quietly through a side door. Her attorney held her hand, smiling softly. You did it, Laura whispered. Maria shook her head. We did it. And maybe this helps someone else too. She stepped outside into the sunlight. For the first time in years, it didn't feel harsh. It felt warm. The judge's reflection back in her chambers, Judge Marks removed her robe and set it neatly on a hanger. She looked out the window at the courthouse steps below, at the swarm of reporters, at the chaos of flashing cameras, at the two worlds colliding. One built on power, the other on truth. Her clerk entered quietly. Tough case, huh? The judge smiled faintly. Not tough, necessary. She picked up her pen and began writing her final notes. Because justice, she said softly, only means something when it applies to everyone, especially the ones who think it never will. The morning after the verdict, the city woke up to headlines splashed across every major outlet. Carlyle loses big, judge delivers crushing. Verdict in wrongful termination case. Power meets its limit. $750,000. Judgment marks a landmark for accountability. For the public, it was another courtroom story. For Nathan Carlyle, it was the collapse of a carefully constructed empire. In his penthouse overlooking downtown, the same man who once commanded boardrooms now sat in silence, a tumbler of whiskey untouched beside him. His phone buzzed relentlessly. Lawyers, PR teams, business partners, but he didn't answer. He stared at the skyline, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing her, that judge. The way she looked at him, not with hatred, not even with anger. Just certainty. It haunted him more than the verdict. The fall of Carlyle Holdings by noon. The consequences had begun. A key investor withdrew support from his newest hotel project in Dubai. His board called an emergency meeting to discuss leadership restructuring. Stock. Prices dipped by 8% before lunch. Reporters hounded his building lobby. Former employees flooded social media with stories that mirrored Maria's. For years, Nathan had thought his wealth was a fortress. But he was learning it was really glass, fragile, transparent, and cracking fast. His attorney, Richard Hull, finally arrived at the penthouse, exhaustion written across his face. You didn't just lose the case, Richard said bluntly. You lost the narrative. Nathan looked up, voice low. Then we change it, Richard sighed. You can't charm your way out of this one. You disrespected the judge, humiliated yourself on live TV, and handed your enemies their victory on a silver platter. The public doesn't want an explanation. They want accountability. Nathan turned toward the window again. Accountability, he repeated quietly, as if testing the word for the first time. It sounds expensive, Richard frowned. It's supposed to. Maria's quiet victory across town. Maria Lopez woke up to a different kind of silence, one filled with peace. She sat at her small kitchen table, sipping coffee that, for once, didn't taste bitter from worry. Her son, Daniel, ran around the apartment, his laughter echoing off the walls. "Mom," he said, holding up a drawing, "I made this for you." It was a picture of her standing tall in a courtroom. A little boy beside her. A woman in a black robe behind a big wooden desk. Maria smiled, tears welling up. "That's beautiful, mijo," he beamed. "You look brave." She looked down at the drawing again. Brave. She'd never thought of herself that way. But maybe now she could start to. Her sister called soon after. "You did it?" she said proudly. "You actually did it," Maria laughed softly. "I didn't do it alone. That judge. She saw right through him. She saw you, Maria. That's the difference." The public's reckoning in the days that followed, the story took on a life of its own. Talk shows debated whether wealth should come with stricter accountability. Activists praised Judge Marks for her no-nonsense stance. Even corporate ethics boards began citing the case as an example of power imbalance finally meeting resistance. But amid the noise, the judge herself stayed silent. She never gave interviews, never appeared on camera. Her chambers remained the same, quiet, methodical, grounded in the principle that justice wasn't performance. It was duty. When a local journalist sent her a request for comment, she declined, offering only a single written statement. Justice doesn't favor the loudest voice. It listens to the truth that refuses to be silenced. That one sentence became its own headline. Nathan's downfall. By the end of the week, Nathan's empire was bleeding. Board members demanded he step down temporarily, though everyone knew what that really meant. He held a brief press conference. The man who once loved microphones now facing them with visible discomfort. "I've made mistakes," he said. Voice low, scripted. "I let my success make me careless. I'm taking time to reflect." Reporters shouted questions. "Do you admit to wrongdoing? Will you appeal the verdict? Do you plan to apologize to Ms. Lopez?" Nathan's jaw flexed, the old arrogance flickering like a dying flame. He paused, the entire room waiting, and then finally said, "I already have. It wasn't true. Not yet." But for the first time, maybe, he wanted it to be. When the cameras shut off, he walked off stage and sat alone, head in his hands. The silence that followed was deafening. The judge's lesson. That afternoon, Judge Marks presided over another case, a landlord-tenant dispute. Small, quiet, ordinary. She treated it with the same attention she gave to the Carlisle case. Because to her, justice wasn't measured by fame or fortune. It was measured by fairness. After the session, a young clerk approached her nervously. "Judge Marks, I just wanted to say, that last case you handled, it meant a lot to people. The way you stood up to him." The judge smiled faintly. "I didn't stand up to him. I stood up for the law." The clerk hesitated. "Still, you made people believe again." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Then that's enough." Redemption. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived at Maria's apartment. No lawyer's stamp. No company header. Just her name, handwritten. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Maria, I don't expect forgiveness. I barely deserve acknowledgement. But I do understand now what I didn't before, that power isn't control. It's responsibility. You were right to speak up. You showed more courage than I ever have. I've started a fund for workplace equality in your name. It doesn't erase what happened, but maybe it helps someone else find their voice sooner than you did." Nathan Carlisle Maria read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it on the table beside her coffee. She didn't know if she believed his sincerity, but she believed something had shifted. For the first time, Nathan Carlisle wasn't trying to win. He was trying to understand. The quiet epilogue. A month later, Maria returned to the courthouse, not as a plaintiff, but as a visitor. She sat quietly at the back of another courtroom, watching as a young woman pleaded her case against her employer. When the judge entered, a different one, not Judge Marks, Maria felt a sense of full circle. The same air, the same tension, but a different energy inside her. When the session ended, she stepped outside, closing her eyes against the sun. No cameras. No reporters. Just the sound of wind and footsteps and freedom. Sometimes justice didn't roar. Sometimes it whispered. And sometimes that was louder. The judge's reflection, final scene. Late that evening, Judge Marks sat in her office, the city's lights reflecting off her window. Her clerk entered quietly. "Another long day, Judge?" She smiled. "Justice doesn't rest." The clerk nodded, then hesitated. "That Carlisle case? It's still all over the news." Judge Marks looked out the window, the faintest hint of weariness softening her expression. "Yes, but stories fade. What matters is what people learn." The clerk tilted his head. "And what do you think he learned?" The judge thought for a moment, then said quietly, "That in this courtroom, money can buy time, but not truth." She turned off the light, picked up her briefcase, and walked into the night. 1 year later, Maria had moved on. She'd found a new job managing a small local hotel, not glamorous, but honest. She was good at it, respected, trusted. Daniel had grown taller. He'd stopped asking if his mom was winning. Now, he asked what fairness meant, and she told him, "Fairness means everyone plays by the same rules, even the ones who think they make them." Sometimes, she still received letters from strangers who'd seen her story, who'd found courage in it. She didn't write back to all of them, but she kept everyone in a drawer, because justice, she'd learned, wasn't a moment. It was a ripple. The final image a year to the day after the verdict. Judge Evelyn Marks walked into her courtroom. Robe flowing, eyes steady. New faces filled the seats. New voices ready to be heard. Different names. Different stories, but the same principle, because justice doesn't retire. It doesn't bend to wealth. It doesn't care who you are, it just waits patiently for the truth to step forward, and when it does, it listens.